Today I would like to recommend to you a heart-wrenching comic, Binding the Dragon for Queen. It ranks among the best in terms of cruelty index in my heart. The previously recommended Era and Yusha are cruel but not scumbag. But the protagonist of this comic, Xien Long, not only was she tortured cleanly, even the scumbag confessed clearly. The story tells about Yen Yuan, the Emperor of the Ninth Heaven, 2 lifetimes of sadomasochism with Dragon General Xien Long, the first lifetime. Emperor Yen Yuan ignores the will of heaven, forced to write Xuanlong's name on the marriage book. By animation, and Xien Long formed a Taoist couple in Sanqing Stone. Anime gods and demons will fight soon. Xien Long fought bloody battles as a general. In the end, the demons were driven away, but he was seriously injured. Die in the arms of the Emperor of Heaven and fall into reincarnation. Karmic fire burns and leaves eternal scars. The Emperor abdicated 3 days later. Leave the divine book and invite yourself into reincarnation. Animation searching for Xien Long in all directions. The second reincarnation of Yen Du became the human Emperor Yu Baidong. Xien Long is an ordinary dragon with a miserable life experience. There are scars on the face caused by the fire from the past life. As a result, he has been rejected by his family for being ugly since he was born. His mother was even more reluctant to name him. In addition, I almost had dystocia when giving birth to him. The father died again trying to save their mother and son. Therefore, Xien Long has become the most unpopular one among the dragon clan. His mother beat and scolded him. Brothers and sisters don't like him either. Finally, on a night of heavy rain, that woman was drunk, beating the young Xien Long hard with a whip and reprimanded him for killing his husband. Xien Long begged his mother not to abandon him, but she didn't feel pity. Instead, he used his sword to cut off Xuanlong's undeveloped horns. Just like that, Xien Long endured the pain in his heart being driven out of the dragon clan in the heavy rain. Then he wandered all the way to the foot of Jinghua Mountain. Since then, I have been practicing alone in the cold pool for thousands of years. Afraid of scaring others because of his ugly appearance, so he rarely goes out. One day when I went out, I picked up a seriously injured human being and came back. Although Xien Long has a cold personality, he is kind-hearted. Use Shinko dragon scales as medicine to revive him. Since that day, humans have been following him. Xien Long doesn't think so. I just feel that the noise of the human race is very annoying. The name of the human race is Yen Yuan, and he is the emperor of the world. On the wedding night, Queen Ning Xiu fell critically ill and fell into a coma. Dragon heart is needed as medicine to cure the disease. Yen Yuan deliberately hurt herself after learning about it. Climbing mountains and wading through rivers to reach the foot of Jinghua Mountain. It's because of him, Xien Long, who has been practicing for nearly 10,000 years. Yen Yuan approached him and named him Han Bo. Tell him lovingly that I like you. At that moment, Xuanlong's heart has been silent for thousands of years, jumped hard for no reason. Just because no one has ever said such words to him in thousands of years of loneliness. But Xien Long doesn't know that people's hearts are sinister. That person said he liked him, but what I was thinking about was how to pull out his scales and dig out his heart. Unconsciously, a month flew by. Yen Yuan's injuries have already healed, but he stayed to make excuses, pretending that he was still injured internally. Xien Long saw him crying out in pain all day long, so I fed him a bowl of grey decoction every day. Yen Yuan was frightened. Xien Long prepared sweet sugar cubes for him. It can be said that he has responded to Yen Yuan's requests this month. Human hearts are made of flesh. Gradually, Yen Yuan also felt the kindness of Xien Long. It's not an evil dragon like the rumors during the interview. So when I lie down to rest at night, Yen Yuan looked at the man's lonely back. I couldn't help but wrap my arms around his thin waist. I want to dispel that loneliness for him. Yen Yuan cherishes Queen Ning Xiu. I've always been in love with him and never crossed the line. So far clean and well. But when he saw Xien Long, he couldn't help but want to protect and possess. Xuanlong's body froze without exception. White anime. The roots of the ears are slightly reddish, visible to the naked eye, except for the first conditioned reflex to push Yen Yuan away after causing his injuries to worsen. Later, Xien Long no longer resisted Yen Yuan's approach. Even now he is not used to having people by his side. I can't get used to the feeling of irregular heartbeat. Yen Yuan's gentle voice sounded in his ears. Do you like me, Sukman? Xuanlong's green pupils widened blankly. My mind is in chaos. He doesn't know, he probably likes it after all. No creature would hate someone who treats him sincerely. Abo, are you willing to marry me? A word from the human emperor Yen Yuan. Xuanlong's heart suddenly became confused. Just because no one has ever said such words to him in nearly 10,000 years of loneliness. Yen Yuan was originally the emperor of heaven in the 9 heavens. In order to find his lover Xien Long, he fell into reincarnation. He became an emperor on earth, but was blinded by the way of heaven. Let him mistake the prime minister's son Ning Xiu for the love of his life. Maybe it was a trick of heaven, and under the arrangement of fate, he came to his true love Xien Long again. After a few months of getting along, he unconsciously developed a fondness for Xien Long. In this way, he confessed to Xien Long. Ask Xien Long if he also likes him. Xien Long doesn't know. Maybe he likes it after all. No living being would hate someone who treats him sincerely. Seeing that Xien Long didn't answer, Yen Yuan leaned forward and got closer. Frankly speaking, in their human race, if two people fall in love, they can become husband and wife, never separated. His voice is as gentle as Yu Bai Dong, the most sincere music in the world. Abo, are you willing to marry me? When Xien Long heard this, his heart suddenly became confused. The words husband and wife are too unfamiliar to him. He lived alone for thousands of years. He never thought that there would be creatures willing to accompany him in the future. Cheeks feel inexplicably hot. Xien Long turned away and stopped looking at him. He said lightly that if you are willing, it doesn't matter to me. Yan Yuan chuckled, then. After a period of in-depth communication, there is no blood on Xuanlong's face. Black hair is scattered messily around the body. It was the first time Yan Yuan saw him so weak. I feel a little sad, unconsciously concerned about whether you feel uncomfortable. Xien Long opened his half-drowsed eyes. Seeing that Yan Yuan was worried, she just said it was okay. After a while, Yan Yuan wanted to ask him to get up and clean up, but found that he had fallen asleep. Xien Long usually sleeps very lightly. If Yan Yuan turns over slightly, he will wake up. Never slept so deeply. Yan Yuan thought this might be his only chance. He stared at Xuanlong's face for a long time. That's Zhang Jiying's restrained face, wearing a mask, looks like a god descending to earth. He has always been curious, why does Xien Long wear that golden bronze mask? I never took it off even to sleep. Now seems like a good opportunity to find out. But he no longer has that intention because there are more important things waiting for him to do. Half an hour later, Yan Yuan got onto the bed with gentle hands and feet. Walking towards the stone table not far away, available after Yan Yuan came, including the brocade quilt on the stone bed. Yan Yuan said that the stone bed was too hard. Xien Long just went to the human world to get it. Until then, the dragon had been sleeping on a bare stone bed. Yan Yuan pressed the dagger on the stone table. It feels like it weighs 1,000 kilograms, but he still forced himself to walk towards the man. Between Xuanlong's life and Ning Xiu's life, he chose the latter. Xien Long has been practicing for nearly 10,000 years and shouldn't be so weak. But his power is gradually weakening as the calamity approaches. The pain in my body became more vivid. Even the wounds left by pulling out the scales have been unable to heal. Yan Yuan stopped quietly beside the bed. His eyes fell on the wound on Xuanlong's left chest. That wound is right on the heart. Yan Yuan thought that as long as she stabbed the dagger in he will die, it won't be too painful. Then rip out his heart, then you can go back and save Au. But when the dagger is raised high in the hand, but he has been unable to fall, that kind of deep discomfort almost drowns me. It seems that he and Xien Long didn't meet each other for the first time. But in the previous life, we have known each other for a long time. You Bai Dong, otherwise how could he be so soft-hearted? But then I thought of Ning Xiu. He still gritted his teeth and raised the dagger in his hand. He stabbed Xien Long hard in the chest. The man on the stone bed let out a low whimper. Looks very painful. Yan Yuan's movements were so sudden that he was stunned by the animation. Xuanlong's miserable expression was reflected in his eyes. After a moment of confusion, Xien Long opened his eyes without warning. I asked him puzzledly why he wasn't sleeping yet. Yan Yuan quickly hid the dagger in his sleeve. She pursed her lips tightly and said, "Look at how beautiful you are." Xien Long didn't notice anything strange. He was already used to the pain in his chest. Yan Yuan always likes to say naughty words to him. Xien Long was ashamed in his heart, but he didn't show it on his face. He just said lightly, "Go to sleep." Then he was overwhelmed and fell asleep again. Yan Yuan breathed a sigh of relief and did not dare to act rashly again. He felt vaguely annoyed at missing this opportunity. But I feel relaxed somehow. Just wait, just wait. Suppress messy thoughts. Yan Yuan went to get a clean white cloth, carefully clean up the blood stains on Xuanlong's body. He went up and hugged him from behind and fell asleep. Yan Yuan bids farewell to Xien Long and proposed that Xien Long return to the palace with him. After the two became husband and wife. When Xien Long woke up the next day, he felt something strange about his body. It's not convenient to walk. He had heard people say that it was a pleasant thing. Now it seems that it is mostly spiritual happiness. Yan Yuan loves to eat the steamed buns and lotus leaf porridge in Jinggula. Xien Long got up and went to Chang'an City to buy breakfast. In the past, he would not go out once every 100 years. Anime now has to travel to the human world 3 times a day. Yu Bai's anime. Yan Yuan has a very picky mouth. Yu Bai would rather be hungry than touch the things he dropped. Yan Yuan was still sleeping when I came back. Xien Long placed the food box on the stone table. The fingers with clear joints tore open the skirt of his clothes, showing the position of the heart. Pick up the dagger that Yan Yuan used to dig out the dragon's heart last night. The palm of my hand gently crossed the air between my heart. The skin was instantly covered with beautiful black scales. Dragon scales on the heart are the best medicine for healing. Now it has almost been plucked out. He swallowed the groan into his throat, sprinkled the dragon scales into the bowl. Suddenly Yan Yuan's voice came from behind. What are you doing? Xien Long calmly hid the dagger in his sleeve and returned it. Wake him up softly for breakfast. Yan Yuan noticed something was wrong. Ask him what he was doing just now, and he looked so bad. Xien Long was silent for a moment, avoiding his eyes. Yan Yuan knew Xuanlong's temper well and had to give up. While eating, he asked Xien Long that the country must not be without a king for a day. He had to go back to the palace. Xuanlong's hand trembled instantly. The chopsticks hit the ground. Then he picked up the chopsticks without changing his expression. He just replied lightly, "I'll take you back." "Are you leaving in the afternoon?" Yen Yuan was a little angry when she saw his reaction. He put down his chopsticks and said aggrievedly, I have to leave. Wouldn't you be reluctant to part with it at all? Xien Long was silent for a moment, then raised his eyes to look at him. If you leave, I can't keep you. Yen Yuan knows that he likes her, but I can't quite read his emotions. He always looks cold and indifferent to everything. This made Yen Yuan feel angry for no reason. Who said I have to go alone? As soon as these words came out, not only the dragon, even Yen Yuan himself was stunned. He originally planned to trick Xien Long into returning to the palace and then find an opportunity to dig out the dragon's heart. But just now it seemed like he really couldn't let him go. If you are still angry about this, you must be a demon. The two sides looked at each other for a moment, and Yen Yuan came to his senses first. Reach out and hold Xuanlong's hand holding the chopsticks. He smiled and said that we are now husband and wife. Of course we want to be together. Don't you want to stay with me until we grow old? Xien Long will stay with each other until old age. The fourth word is silently recited in the heart. My ears felt inexplicably hot, but I calmly lowered my eyes and said, I am willing. Half an hour later, 10,000 feet in the sky, a giant black dragon shuttles through the clouds carrying a stunning-looking human race man on his back. As we get closer to the palace, Yen Yuan's mind became heavier and heavier. He is riding on the back of a black dragon. Jade white fingers gently touched the dragon's half-broken right corner. I couldn't help feeling sad and asked Xien Long why one of the horns on his head was broken. Xien Long responded with an understatement. Frankly speaking, it was cut off by my mother when I was a child. Yen Yuan's heart suddenly tightened. Why? Xien Long was silent for a while, calmly said maybe it's because his mother doesn't like him. That day, she went crazy with alcohol and cut off his dragon horn with a sword, and expelled him from the dragon clan. He didn't see her again after that. I didn't even have the chance to ask her why she did that to me. Yen Yuan's throat is blocked. I want to say some nice words to make him happy, but I can't say anything. I had no choice but to bend down and touch the broken horn of Xien Long. Hard way, you still have me, I like you. He wouldn't dare to say anything more. When that day comes, the truth will be too cruel. Xien Long seems to be indifferent to many things on the surface. Since the animation, he will remember every word Yen Yuan said in his heart. Just because no one ever took him seriously, Yen Yuan treats him well and is willing to get close to him. He took it seriously, and besides, he loved Yen Yuan deeply. There is no need for any reason. It's an instinct engraved deep in the soul, just like the scars on his face burned by karmic fire. Immortal and immortal. Xien Long, who is about to ascend to immortality, fights for his lover, leaving the cold pool where I have practiced for thousands of years. Willing to follow the human emperor to the palace. The emperor thought he was just acting on the occasion, coaxing people to come to the palace to pull out scales and dig out hearts to save their lover. But little did he know that he could not help but give up his sincerity. Xien Long takes the swallow kite, soars into the clouds and rides in the mist, setting off from Handan. Not long after, we arrived over the imperial city. Suddenly a white light flashed. The two of them appeared directly in the emperor's bedroom after Yen Yuan placed Xien Long. Yu Bai animation left in a hurry because the queen was critically ill. The news that Yen Yuan returned to the palace safely spread quickly. When he arrived at Wanfeng Hall, the imperial doctors were already waiting for him, and bluntly said that if there is no longer a dragon heart that can be used as medicine, the queen will die soon. Yen Yuan's heart suddenly tightened. I remember Xien Long trusting me so much, frowning and asking the imperial doctor in a deep voice, is there anything other than digging out dragon hearts? Is there no other way? Imperial Doctor Zonghua silenced Su Tu tell him that if he really can't find the dragon heart and dragon scales, he can. When Yen Yuan heard this, her body showed evidence. Zonghua added that the closer the dragon scales are to the heart, the better the effect will be. If you take it for a month, the queen will wake up. Yen Yuan's brows relaxed, her eyes mixed with joy and sorrow. If that's the case, not only does Xien Long not have to die, but he can also save Ayu. It's really the best of both worlds. He believed that dragon scales should be able to grow back just like human fingernails. It's better to have a painful bowel movement than to dig out a dragon's heart. Even if the scales are removed, they will grow again. Once you dig out your heart, there will no longer be any coldness in the world. The side halls of Qiankuan Palace are not as luxurious as the main hall, but it is also an extremely spacious and scattered building. For the first time, Xien Long came into contact with the place where Yen Yuan grew up. My heart, which has always been lonely and boring, is rarely curious. Can't help but observe. It turns out that man was raised in a place like this. No wonder he's a little more arrogant. But in Xuanlong's opinion, Yen Yuan is cute no matter what. Xien Long is approaching because of the great calamity recently. I feel more and more that my spiritual power is getting weaker. But just flying such a short distance already made him physically and mentally exhausted. Seeing a bed in the palace, he went over to sit cross-legged and meditate. Unexpectedly, I fell asleep while sitting, and the sky was getting dark. The hall, which had been quiet for a long time, suddenly heard the sound of opening the door. Xien Long woke up instantly. Open your eyes and look at the door warily. It's Yen Yuan who's back. I don't know when that man changed into a shining dragon robe with a jade crown on his head and a slender body. It makes him, who is already fair-xinned, look even more noble and extraordinary at the moment. Yan Yuan strolled to Xuanlong's side. Surround him naturally. Put your face on Xuanlong's shoulder. Smiling lowly, he asked Xien Long if he missed him. Xien Long let him surround him. There is an imperceptible softness in the cold eyes. He let out an almost inaudible hum. It turned out he was acting. Hear the other party answer like this. Yan Yuan couldn't help feeling happy in her heart. I couldn't help but leaned into his ear and whispered, I miss you too. Listen to his answer. Xien Long smiled unconsciously. Yan Yuan was stunned for a moment, looking at the man's extraordinary heroic profile in disbelief. Your heart is pounding. You just laughed. This is the first time you smile at me. Xuanlong's eyes showed a bit of serenity. Hasn't he laughed before? It seems like this. There was nothing that made him happy before, but it's different now. This person said he likes him and wants to care about him. Yan Yuan could not suppress her inner impulse to get close to Xien Long. He came closer and said seriously, you look so beautiful when you smile. You have to smile more in the future. Xien Long has never been praised like this before. There was a slight blush on the face. He opened his face unnaturally and said Suddenly Yan Yuan pinched his chin, gently pulled his face back, said tenderly, I want to do something to warm up their relationship. Yan Yuan knew that she was wrong, but riding a horse is always difficult to control. He comforted himself in his heart. Since the animation, when Ning Xiu wakes up, he will definitely have a clean break with Xien Long. Is now just to stabilize. Xien Long just does these unnecessary things. The emperor on earth saves his queen, coaxing the infatuated Xien Long to come to the palace. On the first day I came here, I ate them all. After a hearty battle, Xien Long looked as if he was exhausted, just like last time. Yan Yuan nervously asked him if he felt uncomfortable. I thought to myself that I had obviously been very careful this time. Xien Long couldn't bear his worries and said in a dumb voice that it was okay. It hurts, but my heart is sweet. Yan Yuan carefully pulled up the brocade quilt for him. In the anime, I suddenly saw the wound on Xuanlong's heart and couldn't help but prove it. Concerned about why this injury hasn't healed after so long. Not only is it not getting better, it is also getting worse. If left untreated, I'm afraid it will fester. Xien Long didn't want to tell him about the approaching catastrophe, which worried him, so I thought it was because of the weather. Yan Yuan originally thought it was a monster with powerful spells. If you are injured, you will heal quickly. That doesn't seem to be the case now. He suddenly felt worried. Then he put his arms around Xuanlong's neck lovingly. Wen said, tomorrow I will ask the imperial doctor to get some medicine to apply on you. Mortal medicine is of no use to monsters. Xien Long did not explain. That didn't stop him from feeling warm in his heart. When he is about to fall asleep, suddenly he heard Yan Yuan say something in his ear. Abo, I want to discuss something with you. Xien Long couldn't help but open his eyes and ask him what was going on. Those green eyes are always cold, but Yan Yuan can see the ultimate tenderness in it. He had already vaguely guessed where the wound on Xuanlong's heart came from. An imperial physician talks about the dragon scales in the heart. I guessed it from the moment it was the best medicine. He finally understood why he was taking after that dark decoction. Such a serious injury can be completely healed in 3 days. It turns out that they were all exchanged for the dragon scales from Xuanlong's heart. His injury is healed, but Xuanlong's injuries from this have not healed yet. It is difficult for Yan Yuan to talk to him again, but then I thought about my lover who was dying after all. He said it. Can Abo give me some dragon scales? Xien Long was stunned when he heard this. Then confusion appeared in his eyes. What do you want dragon scales for? Yan Yuan looked at him and found it difficult to tell the truth. So he lied and said that a good friend of his was seriously ill. If you don't get treatment, you will die. The human emperor and Xien Long had in-depth exchanges so many times, but I've never even seen his face. This time I finally took the opportunity to take off the mask. But when he saw the terrible scar, he confirmed. It's not fear but heart-wrenching pain. It hurt so much that it felt like his soul had been shattered. After the two people had a hearty exchange, Yan Yuan gently hugged Xuanlong's waist, asked him why he always wears a mask. As he spoke, he wanted to reach out and pick it off, but as soon as he touched it, Xien Long grabbed his wrist. He admitted that he was afraid of scaring him because of his ugly appearance. Yan Yuan swore to him that he would not. Xien Long turned his head and looked at the bright yellow tent above. After a long time he calmly said, all creatures in the world hate him when they see him, only Yan Yuan does not dislike it. He was afraid that Yan Yuan would not like him anymore after seeing his true appearance. Yan Yuan didn't expect Xien Long to be so cold on the outside but so sensitive on the inside. Tokizumi anime. But then he said without thinking, I promise no matter what you become, Abo is still Abo. My love for you will never change. Xien Long couldn't help but look at Yan Yuan after hearing this. Those warm and watery eyes are full of sincerity. Yan Yuan slowly stretched out her hand. He didn't hide. The dark gold mask engraved with ancient Sanskrit characters was finally taken off. Even though Yan Yuan was mentally prepared when seeing the full face of Xien Long, still couldn't help but gasp. Just looking at the left side of his face, he looks brave and cold, with a straight nose. That is an excellent appearance. If you were immortal, there must be many girls waiting in line to marry him. But the scar on the skin on the right side of his face is really terrifying. Almost ruined all the beauty. Yan Yuan didn't feel ugly. He just felt a pain in his heart for no reason. It's as if the soul is being torn apart. It gave him the urge to cry bitterly. How so? Compared to Yen Yuan's reaction, Xien Long was very indifferent. He laughed at himself and said that maybe he had done something wrong in his previous life. God punished him by leaving scars on his face. Yen Yuan instantly reached out and hugged him. Abo, I feel sorry for you. Xien Long said calmly that if you don't dislike me, you won't be afraid. He doesn't care about the rest of the people. In the blink of an eye, the sun has risen 3 poles. The sun outside is getting more and more fierce. Yen Yuan puts on her dragon robe and prepares to go to court. Before leaving, tells Xien Long to come back and have dinner with him at noon. After walking a few steps, he stopped again, thinking of Queen Ning Xiu's physical condition. He turned around and mentioned the dragon scale thing. Xien Long thought about the tenderness just now. I feel like the pain of pulling out my scales is nothing. I will give it to you tenderly. At noon, inside the alleyway of the Vermilion Palace wall, Yen Yuan wears a dragon robe and sits on the dragon ladder. A group of palace maids and eunuchs were walking towards the Jimuan Palace. Suddenly the eunuch Chen Yen next to him asked him cautiously, since Mr. Han has been favored, can you give him a title? Yen Yuan's face instantly turned cold after hearing this, condescendingly saying that he promised. I want to be with Ning Xiu for the rest of my life. Unable to break his promise, Chen Yen leaned over and quietly retreated. Yen Yuan looked away, knowing that he owed Xien Long, but since ancient times, monsters have taken different paths. If it weren't for Ning Xiu, maybe the two of them will never have any intersection in this life. Not to mention status. He promised that Ning Xiu would not bear the burden. First, according to the original plan, he was going to take the dragon's heart to save his lover's life. But several months of getting along with Xien Long made him move into hiding. He wants Xien Long to live well. Wait until Ning Xiu is healthy. He separated from Xien Long and set him free. But he considered everything, but only Xuanlong's sincerity was missed. How to place this sincerity, he doesn't know, but right now I don't care about that much anymore. He turned around and told Chen Yen not to tell Ning Xiu about Xien Long. Then he breathed a sigh of relief silently, but Xincha, who had just relaxed, took advantage of the loophole. Unconsciously, I remembered those times with Xien Long. Yen Yuan was suddenly upset. Yubai was tempted to think that he might really be possessed by evil spirits. Otherwise, how could my mind be filled with the shadow of Xien Long? Xien Long pulled out 30 dragon scales from his heart for the sake of the human emperor. At that moment, blood rushed into the liver and intestines, and the heart was broken. After the emperor fell in love with him, he went to court. The black dragon catastrophe is coming, and after this, he will attain enlightenment and become an immortal. As a result, the habits gradually degenerated and became similar to those of human beings. Not long after Yen Yuan left, Xien Long fell into a deep sleep. At about noon, there was sudden lightning and thunder in the sky. Xien Long suddenly woke up. He remembered his promise to Yen Yuan to hand over the dragon scales to him at noon. Animation then endured the discomfort and got out of bed, cleaned up the body hastily. Then he transformed into a black iron dagger in his hand. After smoothly peeling off 15 dragon scales, the movement gradually slowed down. The severe pain in his chest made his wrists tremble continuously. Every slice he cut made his liver and intestines break. But he promised Yen Yuan to give him 30 tablets, so I endured the pain and continued cutting piece by piece. There was blood pouring from the back of my chest. The originally clear water was dyed extremely red. Then he finally stopped, and in the blink of an eye it was noon. Xien Long was sleeping when Yen Yuan left. When I came back, I saw him still sleeping. So he stood on the edge of the bed and gently shook the man on the bed. Abo wakes up. Xuanlong's face is pale. He said weakly that you are back, and then did not wait for Yen Yuan to speak. Then he handed him a wooden box. Yen Yuan asked him confusedly what this was. Xien Long said lightly. Yen Yuan couldn't help being surprised. Open it and take a look. There are 30 clean dragon scales neatly stacked inside. Exudes a familiar light cold fragrance. Yen Yuan raised her head and looked at him lovingly. Abo, you are so kind. Xien Long is not used to being praised like this. So he avoided looking and said nothing, and Yen Yuan got the dragon scale. I want to give it to Ning Xiu, who is critically ill, immediately. But he didn't want Xien Long to know and be sad, so he said that he was in an emergency and couldn't eat with him. Come look for him again in the evening. On second thought, I asked Xien Long if he would be angry. Xien Long was stunned for a moment, then shook his head. Yen Yuan was so moved that she didn't know what to say. After chatting with Xien Long for a while, he hurriedly left. It's dinner time. The eunuch outside asked Xien Long if he could pass on the meal. Xien Long is sitting cross-legged on the bed and regulating his breath. I casually asked him when a Yuan would come over. Who dares to call Yen Yuan's name in this world? Apart from the queen, there is only this young master inside. From the initial panic, Xiao Detzi already very calm now, but now I still feel a little guilty when I tell lies. So hey, he said that the emperor is busy with state affairs and can't get away from it. Let Xien Long not blame. Xien Long spoke in a muffled voice to express that he did not mean to blame. But the longing in his heart made him feel uncomfortable. After a while, he asked Xiao Detzi to step aside and stop passing on the supper. then slowly opened the skirt. I saw that the scaled wounds were only wrapped with white cloth. Mortal herbs are of no use to him and he can only beat them hard. If it were before, healing can be cured by adjusting the breath a few times with magic. It's useless now. I have never been afraid of the heavenly tribulation black dragon before become an immortal or die, no one cares anyway. Now he is starting to get scared, afraid if I die what should I do if I leave Yen Yuan alone. At the same time, Wanfeng Palace, after the dragon scales were used as medicine, Ning Xiu's complexion became much rosier. The imperial physician Zong's painting returns to the emperor. It won't take 30 days for the queen to wake up. Yen Yuan couldn't help but be overjoyed when she heard this. Zong Hua thanked him and prepared to leave. Yen Yuan suddenly remembered something that stopped him. Tell Zong Hua to give him the medicine he brought. These days, he has been focusing on Ning Xiu. Completely left Xien Long in the cold. At this time, I thought that Xien Long felt a little guilty for no reason. I thought I should spend some time with him when I go back tonight. In fact, when he was guarding Ning Xiu, he often thought of Xien Long. Whenever I lose my mind, thoughts will appear in my mind unconsciously. The way Xien Long laughs awkwardly, Yen Yuan deeply felt that it was wrong for her to do this. In order to get the medicine, he, acting together with Xien Long with false feelings, this already made him feel guilty towards Xien Long. What's more, he also violated his promise to Ning Xiu. If he continues to make mistakes, his conscience will be troubled. Therefore, even though I missed Xien Long very much these days, I still endured it. He doesn't want to make the same mistake again and again, but it's not an option to keep avoiding each other like this. Thinking for a long time, he asked Chen Yen to go to the treasury to pick out some fine jade pendants. Chen Yen took his life and left in a hurry. When I came back, the tray was neatly arranged. There are a dozen precious jade pendants for him to choose from. At a glance, Yen Yuan was struck by a piece carved with iris flowers. Oval jade pendant attracts. That jade pendant is very delicate and beautiful, especially the carving of the iris above. Yen Yuan likes it very much for no reason. He pointed at the jade pendant and said with satisfaction, "This is it." Then I asked Chen Yen carefully, "Is Xien Long okay these days?" Chen Yan's forehead reply, "Mr. Han has been staying in the palace and has not gone out. I just have a bad appetite. It doesn't take much at a time." Yen Yuan was a little dazed when he heard it. He remembered that Xien Long had a huge appetite when he was in Gyutan. Xien Long will eat up the rest of his meal. After coming back to his senses, he asked Chen Yen to order the imperial kitchen to prepare more fish and shrimps. He remembered that those were Xuanlong's favorite foods. The human emperor and Xien Long send love tokens to each other. Xien Long even pulled out his most precious reverse scale and gave it to him. The emperor took over Ni Lin and was not happy but full of sadness. He couldn't help but think of the 30 movies from before. Just pull out one piece and it will bleed so much. As for the 30 films, he hid from Xien Long several times because of guilt. This day I finally couldn't bear it anymore. I carefully selected a good jade pendant and decided to go see Xien Long. He couldn't hide any longer. It was getting dark now, since the huge imperial city was swallowed up by the night. Yen Yuan pushed open the door of the side hall of Qiankuan Palace. As soon as I stepped in, I smelled a faint cold fragrance. There was no light in the hall, so it was pitch dark and nothing could be seen. He called ABO several times, but got no response. Yen Yuan suddenly panicked. He hurriedly walked to the inner room and opened the bright yellow bed curtain. I was relieved when I saw the fallen man. He thought Xien Long was gone, and Xien Long was sleeping soundly. I didn't even notice anyone coming in. He is already quiet, and becomes even more peaceful when he is asleep. Just a handsome face. It looked too pale under the dim candlelight. Yen Yuan gently shook his shoulders. After a moment, Xien Long opened his eyes, still a little unable to react. He looked at Yen Yuan motionless. His face is so beautiful in the dim environment that it looks like a mortal. Yen Yuan sat next to him. He said softly, "Why did you go to bed so early?" But feeling unwell actually doesn't mean that I went to bed early. Instead, he slept all day. And Xien Long slowly sat up. I would like to ask Yen Yuan if he is done with his work. Or how are you doing these days? But he was stupid and in the end he only said 2 words, "No." Then unconsciously, he stretched out his hand and slowly caressed Yen Yuan's cheek. When Yen Yuan saw this, she couldn't help but choked up and said, "I'm sorry. I wanted to come back to find you that night." As he spoke, he took out the jade pendant he had prepared in advance from his sleeve. "Send it to Xien Long like a treasure," said that he specially picked this from the treasury to give to Xien Long. Xien Long picked up the jade pendant from his palm. "Ask him what this is." Yen Yuan caressed Xuanlong's cheek lovingly, patiently explained to their human race, if both parties agree, will give the other party a token of love. He is both happy in Xien Long. Naturally, we cannot avoid this common etiquette. This iris jade pendant is his token of love to Xien Long. Xien Long stared blankly at Yen Yuan and smiled. "There is an indescribable warmth in my heart." He nodded seriously. "Baby, put the jade pendant away into the secret bag." He whispered that I would take good care of it. Then he raised his hand and touched the back of his neck. It was so violent that it tore off a piece of dark dragon scales. "Wipe off the blood stains on the snow-white clothes and hand them to Yen Yuan." Yen Yuan frowned and asked him blankly what he was doing. Xien Long was silent for a moment and whispered a token of love. The location of the reverse scales on the Dragon Queen's neck. He has nothing to give Yen Yuan, only the mind is the most precious thing in the whole body. This unique reverse scale is the best proof. Once he falls in love, he will never change his heart. Yen Yuan nervously pressed Xuan Long's shoulder and turned to take a look. The originally intact back of the neck is missing a piece of skin. There was a lot of blood, dyeing a large area of the clothes on the back red. Yen Yuan looked miserable and asked if it hurt. Xien Long shook his head, stubbornly stuffing the dragon scale into Yen Yuan's hand. This dragon scale is slightly different from the ones Xien Long gave Yen Yuan before. The previous one was close to a fan shape, but this one is in the shape of a crescent. The dark scales have a faint silvery luster, surprisingly beautiful. Yen Yuan looked at the dragon scales on her palm with a painful look on her face. This reminded him of those 30 tablets. This much blood bleeds after just pulling out one piece. What about 30 pieces? Xien Long pursed his lips and wanted to coax him but didn't know what to say. I could only move my lips dryly to tell him not to be angry. Yen Yuan frowned suddenly. There is a lump in the throat. He doesn't know what's wrong with him. My heart aches as if my heart has been pierced by thousands of arrows. Yu Bai said with difficulty. I'm not angry. Yushua just wanted to say that he was just feeling guilty and uneasy. Zibai moved but in the end couldn't say it out loud. Then he looked up at Xuanlong's handsome face. Just sigh, let me give you medicine. The emperor on earth was heartbroken when he saw the wound on Xuanlong's chest. Tears flowed down unconsciously. He hugged Xianlong into his arms. She screamed at the top of her lungs and said, you lied to me. You said it wouldn't hurt. Yen Yuan chose a fine jade pendant. Give it to Xianlong as a token of love. Xianlong has nothing on his body. Then he pulled out his most precious reverse scale and gave it to him. Yen Yuan saw the back of Xuanlong's neck was injured and choked with sobs. Sighing, let me give you medicine. Xianlong whispered that he didn't need to take medicine. Just wipe it casually. Yen Yuan was a little angry after hearing this. Oh, what nonsense is he talking about? Then he ordered Chen Yen to come back with some golden medicine. Carefully apply pure white medicinal powder. Spread the wine evenly on the injured area on the back of Xuanlong's neck. This is the best medicine in the palace. Hemostasis should be top-notch. But the strange thing is that he poured the whole bottle of medicine on it. It's no use. The wound still hasn't stopped bleeding. Disappear continuously. Almost the entire back of Xianlong was dyed red. Yen Yuan couldn't help but feel her throat tightening. How could heretics be like this? The location of the reverse scale is the source of the dragon's hard work. It can also be said to be a weakness. If that place is touched a little harder, the pain will be 100 times as painful as a broken finger. Not to mention tearing off the scales. How can it be cured with earthly medicine? Xuanlong's breath was a little unsteady when he spoke. Comfort him by saying that he has been strong since he was a child. It's just some blood, so he doesn't need to worry. Then he took a piece of white silk and casually rubbed it on the back of his neck. The wound is already fragile. How can it withstand such devastation? Xuanlong's face didn't show any pain at all. Yen Yuan was horrified and quickly stood up to stop him. How can you not take good care of yourself? Don't move. When Xianlong heard this, he obeyed and remained silent. It's not that he doesn't cherish himself. I was often injured when I was a child. He was beaten bloody by his mother and no one gave him medicine. I could only pick up a piece of cloth that was not too dirty and wipe the wound casually. Pain is pain. You can get over it if you endure it. Yen Yuan called the eunuch outside the palace. I brought clean silk and warm water. Xianlong watched him busy with other things. The latter first wrapped his wound with silk. The movements of those long, self-purifying fingers are also extremely gentle. Occasionally, his knuckles would accidentally touch the intact skin on the back of his neck. Xuanlong's Adam's apple trembled slightly, and his ears turned red numbly. But Yen Yuan's brows never relaxed. Carefully asked him if it hurt. Xianlong shook his head gently. Just like that, Yen Yuan wrapped his neck layer by layer. Finally, I tied a beautiful knot at the back of my neck. Yen Yuan didn't dare to look at Xuanlong's face. The guilt that faded away after one more glance swept over me again. He can be swallowed up in an instant. Yen Yuan dipped the handkerchief in warm water. Then he took Xianlong into his arms and held his hand. Carefully wipe away the remaining blood between your fingers. Then he asked him with concern how the wound on his chest was doing. Xianlong started to feel sleepy again. He held on and replied that he would be fine soon, but Yen Yuan was still worried. He threw the handkerchief back into the silver basin aside. Looking up and staring at the man's pale face, let me see. Xuanlong's erect pupils trembled slightly. It's like I'm hiding from something in the clouds. But Yen Yuan didn't give him a chance. You know I'd be worried. Let me see. The two were in a silent stalemate for a while. Xianlong lowered his head and loosened his belt to reveal the injured area. I only saw a layer wrapped around my chest. I don't know where I got this burlap from. Yen Yuan couldn't see the real injuries inside. So I sat closer to him, carefully removed the white cloth layer by layer. When he got to the last layer, Xianlong suddenly trembled, swallowed lowly. It turned out that the cloth that bound the wound had grown together with the wound. Yen Yuan raised her eyes and glanced at the man's pale face. Hard to say. Please be patient. If it is not removed in time, it will be more difficult to deal with in the future. Xien Long nodded, his body shook violently with his movements, cold sweat dripped from the forehead on the back of Yan Yuan's hands. Yan Yuan couldn't bear it anymore. Put Xien Long into his arms. In an instant, his throat was choked with sobs and his heart was as sharp as a knife. Tears flowed down unconsciously. She screamed at the top of her lungs and said, "You lied to me. You said it wouldn't hurt." Xuanlong's chest rose and fell with difficulty, just a little bit, in a low voice, but this is not the case. He just doesn't want to see Yan Yuan sad because of this. The Emperor of the world saw Xien Long for the first time. There is an inexplicable sadness in my heart. The bone-gnawing pain made him feel as if I knew the man in my previous life. He kept congratulating Xien Long. "Abo, I'm sorry, I don't want to be like this." Yan Yuan was filled with grief when she saw the wound on Xuanlong's chest. Xien Long comforted him that it only hurt a little bit. Yan Yuan did not answer after hearing this. He just silently applied the medicine to Xien Long, then carefully rewrapped the wound with good white silk by anime. Xien Long thought he was angry when he didn't speak. Animation then reached out and pulled the corner of his clothes. "Anime, Adu, don't be angry. My mother used to look like this when she was angry." But Xien Long knew that Yan Yuan was the one who would be soft-hearted to him just when he didn't know what to say. Yan Yuan suddenly raised her head and leaned forward to hug him. He said in a hoarse voice, "Abo, I'm sorry, I don't want to be like this either." He repeatedly told Xien Long that he would be animated. Xien Long was stunned in animation. When I realized what Yan Yuan was saying, Xien Long was a little confused when asked, "Why am I sorry?" Yan Yuan didn't know what she was insisting on. But he just wants to get the other party's guarantee repeated. "If one day, can you forgive me?" Xien Long was silent for a long time before he lowered his eyes. "I only know that you are the best person to me in the world." Yan Yuan heard this and held Xuanlong's hand tighter. "Say it like a child acting coquettishly to an adult, then you promise no matter how big a mistake you make in the future, you must forgive me once." There were emotions in his eyes that Xien Long couldn't see, like sadness and struggle. But Xien Long didn't ask further questions. "I just said dotingly, I promise." Yan Yuan's hanging heart finally fell to the ground. Then he held Xien Long tightly in his arms. He knows that Xien Long always means what he says. Never break your promise to yourself. If you say you forgive, then you will definitely forgive. At this moment, Yan Yuan's heart was filled with indescribable gratitude and happiness. It's like a priceless treasure that I accidentally lost and found again. He doesn't know what happened to him either when it comes to Xien Long. He always worries about gains and losses. At this moment, the depression in my heart is finally lifted. As soon as I feel good, my appetite will follow. Yan Yuan immediately ordered someone to pass the meal in. Pulling Xien Long, who had already put on a clean robe, he walked to the table. One person and one dragon sit around. There is a dazzling array of delicious food on the table. Yan Yuan took a piece of beef specially made by the palace chef and let him try it. Then he said with concern that Xien Long had lost weight after not seeing him for a few days. "Is it because the palace is not used to eating?" Xien Long shook his head and silently picked up the chopsticks. He still doesn't know how to use it. "It took me a long time to pick up the piece of beef in the bowl. Put it into your mouth tentatively." He is still not used to human food with seasonings. For him, natural, unprocessed ingredients are the most delicious. But that piece of beef didn't taste as bad as I thought. Animation. Xien Long chews a few times and then swallows it. Suddenly I felt a familiar churning feeling in my stomach, making him stand still. Yan Yuan looked at him doubtfully. "What's wrong? Isn't it delicious?" Xien Long shook his head. "Wait until the nausea wears off. Swallow the food in your mouth without changing your expression. Reviews are pretty good."
The Emperor of the world holds the soon-to-be ascended dragon and tells bedtime stories, and he kept feeding him extra. In the previous episode, Yan Yuan bandaged Xuanlong's wound. After getting Xien Long's promise, no matter how much he makes mistakes in the future, he forgives him once, and he's in a good mood. Then he ordered the meal to be passed in. Yan Yuan heard Chen Yan say Xuanlong had a bad appetite, so he asked the Imperial Kitchen to make some fish and shrimp he liked. "I want Xien Long to eat more, so I just kept giving him food." Xuanlong responded calmly, but faced with a small bowl of delicious food piled up in front of him, it was difficult. He's been having nausea for no reason lately. The smell of the oil that humans always put out when cooking gets worse, so the food was reduced from 3 meals a day to 1. Yan Yuan sees Xuanlong in a daze, reach out and gather his long hair behind his ears, a handsome face with a dark gold mask exposed. Xuanlong came back to his senses and slowly finished the dishes in his bowl. He suppressed the tumult in his stomach, because besides Yan Yuan, no one's going to put food in his mouth and ask him if he's hungry. So he didn't want to reject Yan Yuan's kindness. If he loses it, no one will be nice to him. Yan Yuan saw him finish eating, so she served him a spoonful of rich chicken soup. "Tell him to eat and rest early. I'll stay with him tonight." After washing up at night, Yan Yuan leaned against the bed with Xuanlong in her arms. I took a book from the library and told him. It tells the story of a snake demon and a rich man. The snake demon opened up a world of killing for the sake of cultivation. Later, she met a kind-hearted rich man and secretly fell in love with him. For him, the snake demon is willing to give up her cultivation, abandoning evil and turning to good, only wanting to keep up with rich boys. But on his wedding night, he learned that she was a demon. So according to the Taoist's instructions, Realgar was added to the wine. When the snake demon revealed its true form, he stabbed her 7 inches with a dagger. Xien Long was sleepy and his consciousness drifted away. Hearing this, I suddenly woke up. Turn around and ask Yan Yuan why he is so. Didn't he love her? Yan Yuan muttered to herself. He was afraid. Xuen Long asked Yan Yuan why he was afraid. In my opinion, even if it is a demon. For worthy people are willing to pay their lives to love. Yan Yuan caressed his cheek as if comforting him. To be frank, the snake demon once harmed people, and the demon has a different way. Hearing the words transvestite, Xuen Long's eyes were filled with confusion. Ask Yan Yuan uncertainly if it means that humans and demons cannot be together. Yan Yuan nodded. Xuen Long did not know what to say for a moment. It took me a long time to say, I've never hurt anyone. Yan Yuan took him into his arms affectionately. We're different. It's meant to be. A couple that won't be hindered by the world. He closed his mouth and tightened Xien Long's grip. For a moment, a cold fragrance made him feel difficult. So after a long gallop, Yan Yuan caressed Xuen Long's ear contentedly. I'm sorry, Po. I couldn't help it. Xien Long is exhausted. After a while, I managed to squeeze out a word that it was fine. Yan Yuan didn't intend to do this. He just wanted to come over and simply accompany Xien Long. Who knew that smell of cold will be out of control? He's even a little suspicious. Did Xien Long put something in the cold incense that made him lose control? But obviously that's impossible. Because it's been on Xien Long since the day we met. It's obviously natural. What's even more outrageous is that he thinks the blood and sweat from Xuen Long. It smells good, unlike humans. Blood smells like rust. Sweat smells even worse. Things seem to be spinning out of control. He wondered why he could never shake off Xien Long's charms. Is it because it's really too delicious? Or is it because he's only tasted this one? I thought that when Ning Xiu wakes up, he won't be like this anymore. When the time comes, he'll let Xien Long go free. White Anime thinks so, but inside he was inexplicably uneasy, because he knew he wanted more than the dragon's scales, and cheated on Hien Ryong. He dared not think further. Smelling the cold fragrance from Xuen Long, he slowly closed his eyes. The Emperor dreamed of his lover in his previous life, watching a man disappear in her arms and break his heart. But he doesn't know that his lover from his previous life is beside him. In the previous episode, the Emperor smelled the cold fragrance of Xuen Long out of control. So after a long gallop, Yan Yuan and Xuen Long were content to sink into the deep sea of consciousness. In his sleep, he had a dream. In the dream, the war was raging, and the bodies were everywhere. The man fell into his arms. Face was covered in blood. He tried to wipe his face with his sleeve, but that bloody face can't be wiped clean. Instead, it tore the wound on the man's face and hurt him. The despair and sadness of the death surged in Yan Yuan's chest. He's scared. He's scared men will leave him forever. So he hugged him and covered his chest with blood, begging him not to die. The man seems to be smiling at him. Her mouth, which was bubbling blood, was trembling slowly, saying something to him. Yan Yuan couldn't hear or see the man's face clearly, and whining in my ears. Yan Yuan broke down and cried, because he noticed that men were starting to stop talking. No matter how much he pleads. Finally, the man died in his arms, until the body turns into a black spark and disappears bit by bit. Yan Yuanmo can't wake up from nightmare, his eyebrows furrowed. He wondered if Yan Yuan was feeling unwell. He got up and wanted to ask before, but Yan Yuan suddenly stopped him. Tell him not to talk to himself. The dream was like a wake-up call. Remind Yan Yuan not to betray Yu again. He has to restrain himself and stay away from Xien Long. Chen Yan was waiting outside the hall when he came out. Seeing his ugly face, he carefully asked him what was wrong. Yan Yuan left in a hurry after saying go to Phoenix Palace. The rain became heavier. When Yan Yuan arrived at the Phoenix Palace, she was soaked. He did not care. Stumbling to Ning Xiu's bedside, grab a man's hand and put it on your face. At this moment, he felt that he was truly alive. That dream was so painful. Yan Yuan had dreamed of that scene countless times. You can't see a man's face clearly, and that despair gripped him, like it was eating away at his bones. He wanted to die with the man of his dreams. That's a man more important than his own life. From the age of 14, he meets men almost every night in his dreams. Every time it's like that. Every time I wake up, my pillow is always wet. But he couldn't see a man's face every time. He guessed it must have been his lover in a previous life. Otherwise, how could he be so stubborn and strange into his dreams? 16 is the best age for kings, met the chosen one. But he missed out on the love of his past life. The Emperor dreamed of his lover in his previous life, and fled the dragon. Since he was 14, he's been dreaming about meeting his lover. He guessed that his lover wanted him to find him. But Yan Yuan, as the crown prince, didn't even leave the palace several times. He didn't know where to find it. Automatic diffusion can only wait for the other party to find themselves. Yan Yuan waited and waited. I've waited a long time, but I haven't waited until my 16th birthday. Father said he would choose one of the daughters of the noble family to be his crown princess. He refused. Without thinking, he knew he loved a man, but he's convinced he'll come. That summer, Yan Yuan met Ning Xiu. The man's bloody face became clear in the dream. Ning Xiu was 17 years old at that time, a year older than Yan Yuan. He looks like a breeze, but he's soft. His mother was an anonymous foot-washing girl and died in childbirth. Therefore, Ning Xiu is the son of a prime minister, but secretly anyone can step on it. The prime minister doesn't care much anyway. This sickly son. When Yan Yuan met Ning Xiu, he is being forced by his brother to pick up a kite from a tree. Just as he was about to touch the kite, he suddenly stepped on air and fell. The stone on the forehead hit the ground and broke his head. Ning Hong, the prime minister's son, saw his cheap brother injured. Knowing that he had caused trouble, he slipped away. Ning Xiu turned to him at that moment. Yan Yuan's heart was suddenly hit. He looked at Ning Xiu with blood all over his face. Think of the man's bloody face in the dream. I was so sad. He doesn't know who he's hurting. Is it the man in the dream or the man in front of you? He can't tell the difference. Ning Xiu staggered out of the garden. Yan Yuan reached out and held him up. Ning Xiu has never met the prince. Just think of him as someone's son. He shook his head with a smile. It was a sad, helpless smile. But Mo Ming and Yan Yuan's dream man's face completely match. He couldn't help but wonder, is it him? After a moment, Yan Yuan muttered, how could it not hurt? Ning Xiu is still smiling. It doesn't hurt when you get used to it. He has beautiful eyes. Yan Yuan felt that the man in the dream and smiling. It should be like this. A pair of gentle eyes. So she gently asked him to follow her, and promised to protect him from now on. In this way, Ning Xiu became the emperor's companion. He wouldn't do anything heavier. Just let him grind ink and wash pens by his side. It hurts like a baby, but ever since he started dating Ning Xiu, Yan Yuan never had that dream again. As time went on, their relationship grew stronger. Gradually, he became convinced that Ning Xiu was the one in the dream. But last night he did it again. That heart-wrenching dream. He thinks Ning Xiu is blaming him. Mutter, to make Ning Xiu not angry, and promised he would never see Xien Long again.
For the first time, an emperor of this world has left the palace with Xien Long, who has cultivated for 10,000 years. I didn't expect you to bring me to the place to cut your talent. The emperor hid from Xien Long for days, for fear of sinking too deep. During this period, I was extremely anxious, but I thought about it, whether it's for Ning Xiu's health or for Xien Long's concern. Now he has a reason to meet Xien Long. So immediately, under the feet of the wind, came to Changkun Palace. Yan Yuan saw Xien Long's back through the window. All the thoughts accumulated for many days poured into my heart instantly. He had mixed feelings, then slowly pushed the door open and entered. Xien Long looked up and saw that it was him, subconsciously hiding the wooden man. I don't know how Xien Long will react. He sat still. The emperor stopped in front of him. Raise your hand and touch his cheek gently. Ask Xien Long how he's doing and if he misses him. Then, without waiting for Xien Long's answer, he leaned forward and hugged her, and whispered in his ear, I miss you so much. Xien Long was at a loss. Aren't you angry? Yan Yuan let go of her hand, explaining that it wasn't about him. Then he held Han Ryong's hand and apologized to him. He said that if he committed any more crimes, Xien Long would throw him out. Xien Long looked at Yan Yuan for a moment and retracted his gaze. He said in a low voice that he had never been with anyone before. If there's something wrong, just say it. If Yan Yuan said bluntly that he hated him, he'll leave without a word. Yan Yuan heard this and held Xien Long in her arms. You're not bad, I'm bad. And promise me that I won't do it again. Let Xien Long not hate himself. Xien Long raised his head and looked at him. I never hated you. Yan Yuan smiled with relief. He knew Xien Long was always the best to him. When I touched Xien Long's finger, I suddenly felt something wrong. Look down. I saw that pair of slender and beautiful fingers. It's covered in tiny scratches. Some are already closed. Yan Yuan quickly asked what was going on. Xien Long withdrew his hand after realizing it. It means you accidentally did it. It doesn't matter. Yan Yuan suddenly frowned and held onto his hand, worried about how there are so many wounds caused by accident. Xien Long doesn't want to say much. He won't have to worry. He'll be fine. Yan Yuan is waiting to catch up. But thinking of Xien Long's temperament, he sighed. It means he'll be angry if he doesn't recover in a few days. Xien Long nodded in agreement, pulled his shirt and shook it a few times. Yan Yuan was immediately amused by this cute move. Cover your mouth and laugh. Then he held Han Long and said he would take him to a good place later. After dinner, for the first time, the emperor took Xien Long out of the Changkun Palace. An hour later, a place like a folk courtyard appeared in front of us. Xien Long doesn't understand why Yan Yuan brought him here. I'm in a daze. Suddenly, a pair of arms slowly embraced him from behind. Yan Yuan's chin rested on his shoulder. Soft voice explained that this is Yan Bing Xiaoju. He'd come over for a few days in his spare time. I'm worried that Xien Long will be in a bad mood all day, so I brought him here to relax and ask Xien Long if he is happy. As long as Yan Yuan is around, it's the best for him. I don't know when the accompanying palace people were dismissed. They're the only ones left. Yan Yuan silently hugged him in his arms. Suddenly, a pleasant cold fragrance came to my face. The emperor could no longer bear it, and Shady asked Xien Long to help him. But Xien Long refused. He grabbed Yan Yuan's wrist. "I'm tired today." Yan Yuan saw that she was rejected and left angrily. Xien Long looked at his back. The pale corners of his mouth moved. I wanted to call him, but I couldn't. Because he knew, those who really want to leave can't be kept, I thought. Let him be. Yan Yuan thought Xien Long would catch up, but I didn't hear anything behind me when I got to the courtyard door, so I got even angrier. After a while, he stormed back the way he came. I can't help but say something hurtful. However, as soon as he approached, he was stunned. Xien Long leaned on the wooden pillar with a pale face. Yan Yuan felt that something was wrong and began to get nervous for no reason. Step up and ask him what's wrong. You feeling unwell? Xien Long was shaken a few times before he opened his eyes. Ask Yan Yuan why he wants to come back. Yan Yuan frowned and said, "How can I really leave you? It's just a bluff." As he spoke, he lifted Xien Long up. "Quick, step inside." How could he forget? This dragon looks cold, but it's pure. I don't know how to coax people. Xien Long leaned on Yan Yuan's shoulder and felt warm in his heart. Then he asked Yan Yuan not to be angry with him easily in the future. Don't even talk about leaving him, because Yan Yuan's words will be taken seriously. Xien Long, who has cultivated for 10,000 years, is actually doing this for the child of the Emperor of the world, willing to pay for 1,000 years of practice. He found that his abdominal pain was not stopping, so he came to the dragons for help from the Holy Doctor. The Holy Doctor advised him to kill the dragon spirit, but he couldn't bear to. Xien Long knew about this Holy Doctor when he was young. No matter what kind of demon or ghost, we will not refuse anyone. You only have to pay enough to get medical treatment. The old man walked into the house without looking back. Come in with me. Since you're not easy to see now, let's skip the 100. Xien Long thanked him and slowly followed him into the room. The old man saw that he was in great pain. Take out a white jade bottle and pass it to him to drink. Frowning, toning and stopping bleeding. Drink it and then I'll do the magic. It's up to fate whether we can keep it or not. After Xien Long finished drinking, a strange warmth rose in his stomach. It actually eased the pain. A moment later, the old man sat down opposite him. To be frank, Xien Long needs to put the fetus in the abdomen like this. The incomplete spirit body is recalled and reshaped. It hurts a little bit. Let Xien Long endure it. Close your palm and form a green orb. And pushed him in the stomach, without saying anything. Xien Long was in so much pain that the veins on the back of his hand popped. Cold sweat trickled down his forehead like rain. Thinking that Yan Yuan was still waiting for him, I can't help but secretly encourage myself to get better earlier. The old man couldn't help but persuade him when he saw his suffering. It is selfish to tell others the truth. One day Xien Long will understand. Today's suffering is a joke. Xien Long did not refute when he heard this. Pretend you didn't hear it. After 4 hours, the old man withdrew his hand. You're lucky the dragon spirit survived. But it's another matter whether you can be born smoothly. Xien Long thanked him and fell asleep. The morning after 2 eyes, the old man came early to check on Xien Long's recovery. When I examined him, I found that he still had an old disease, so he took out the fairy muscle powder and healed the wound. At this moment, Xien Long slowly woke up. When I got up, I found that my stomach was no longer painful. He quickly thanked the old man and condensed a spirit ball at his fingertips. Prepare to pass the 1,000-year-old path to the old man, who knew that the old man's figure flashed and instantly moved to him. Without hesitation, he lifted his hand and bounced the spirit ball back into Xien Long's body. Xien Long widened his eyes in confusion. The old man turned his back and said faintly, "You can pay your debts after you've survived the disaster. I don't want you to mess in." He told Xien Long to eat too if he felt sick in his stomach. And then, without any trouble, he also stuffed some dry food for Xien Long to eat on the road. After doing this, the old man can safely push Xien Long to leave quickly. Xien Long watched the old man walk back into the house. He's got no expression on his face. But the bottom of my heart is warm. Ever since he was banished from the dragon race, besides old man Yan Yuan, he's the second person who treats him well. This way, Phoenix Hall. The Emperor is feeding Ning Xiu, who has just woken up for a few days, medicine. When I heard Xiao Dezi say that Xien Long had not been found, I was immediately furious. If you can't find the head, don't want it. When the Emperor heard that Ning Xiu had awakened, see Xien Long asleep, he hurried down the mountain alone with his entourage. Leave Xiao Dezi outside to guard. When I came back, I found that the building was empty. He rummaged back and forth, and I couldn't find half a shadow of Xien Long. Ning Xiu looked at Yan Yuan, who was unusually irritable, with a difficult expression on her face. I wonder why he's always getting so angry these days. He always lectured the palace people. At this moment, Chen Yan came forward to report that someone was asked. After 10,000 years of cultivation, Xien Long returned to the palace again after having a child. But he didn't know that the Emperor's doctor. He's trying to get his inner core. After he returned from the Holy Doctor, he went straight back to Qiankun Palace. At this moment, Xien Long is sitting at the table. He wanted to tell Yan Yuan about the dragon spirit. But then I was afraid Yan Yuan wouldn't accept it. After all, even he thought it was incredible. Just as he was thinking, Yan Yuan pushed the door open and entered. Angry. Where have you been these past 2 days? Why didn't you let me know? Yu Baidong was really annoyed by Xuanlong's silence. Baidong Xuanlong stood up slowly to explain that he went back to Gutan to get something. Tell Yan Yuan not to be angry. The emperor looked at him for a moment and turned away. But he stopped after 2 steps. Do you know what I mean? I'm worried about anime when you leave without telling me. He pulled his shirt off. Then I thought of the method Xiao Desi taught me last time. He turned around and poured a cup of tea. The emperor looked at Xuanlong, who had a sincere face, and finally lost his breath. Then he took Xuanlong into his arms. I miss you so much. As soon as he finished speaking, a familiar cold fragrance assaulted him. People say that a small parting is better than a new marriage, and this is true. Yan Yuan subconsciously had an idea. The next second, he pushed Xien Long down without caring. When you open your skirt, to his surprise, Xuanlong's chest was intact. I can't help but be overjoyed. Are your injuries all healed? Hunlong nodded shyly. Yan Yuan wanted to continue, but Wanlong stopped her. He can't let the dragon spirit get hurt. Yan Yuan saw that he was not happy, and could only give up. Hand to forehead, ask Xuanlong about the latest. Xuanlong shook his head. He wanted to wait for the right moment. Then tell Yan Yuan about the dragon spirit. If this man can't accept Wig. He went back to Gutan alone to take care of Longling. Next morning, the emperor went to Fengluan Palace. When embracing Ning Xiu, I accidentally smelled the cold fragrance on my body. Ning Xiu was stunned for a moment. As far as he knows, the kite is allergic to pollen and never uses spices. He asked out with full of doubt. Yan Yuan froze instantly when she heard this. Then Tang Sai said that maybe there was a flower smell on the way here. Ning Xiu was skeptical. After a while, hold Yan Yuan's hand and tell him not to leave tonight. Stay and rest together. They've never been married together. Yan Yuan's heart quivered. He and Ning Xiu have always been affectionate and polite, never crossed the line. Ning Xiu's sudden suggestion made him somewhat at a loss. He subconsciously pulled his hand back. Embarrassed, you have a beautiful body. Let's talk about it when you're ready. At this time, the servant handed over the cooked medicinal food. This. And then he flapped his sleeve. Furious, he said, You're a quack. You're useless. I knew what Dragonheart wanted you for. After a while, he calmed down and repeatedly confirmed with Zonghua. Is there anything else in this world besides the heart of the dragon? Is there really nothing else that can save Yu's life? Zonghua was silent for a moment. But it's harder to get than Dragonheart. Yan Yuan listened to the spirit. Ask him what he is. Zonghua raised his head and looked at Yan Yuan. One word at a time. The dragon's inner core. White anime Dragonheart can be taken out when the dragon is unprepared. The inner core is the spiritual core condensed from the dragon's spiritual power. If you are not willing to spit out white animation, others are unable to get. Yan Yuan thought for a moment. Ask if you will die if you lose your inner core. Zonghua shook his head and said he would not. It just becomes human. The emperor of the world saved his queen. To coax Xuanlong, who has cultivated for nearly 10,000 years, to hand over his inner core. But Xien Long turned around and disappeared. Imperial physician Zonghua suggested that if the emperor did not want to take the dragon heart to save the queen, inner core can also be. Besides, dragons don't die if they lose their inner cores. But it's going to be human. It's going to be cool. Yan Yuan sat behind the table in the dim candlelight of the palace hall, stinging at the memorial in front of him, but not reading a word. All he can think about is what Zonghua said earlier. The inner core isn't like dragon scales. It can grow again. If he asks Xuanlong if he can give it to him, it's better than Dragonheart. At least, you can live without your inner core. Just thinking about the weak voice of the queen in the inner hall pulled him back to reality. He quickly got up and rushed to the inner hall. Ning Xiu trembled as she supported herself on the bed. Tell me you had a dream. Dreaming that Yan Yuan likes someone else. The emperor felt ashamed and crazy when he heard this. Ning Xiu must have noticed something. So he lowered his head and comforted her softly, and vowed to love him alone in this life. If there is a different heart, the country will change its master, and die a bad death. Ning Xiu was moved to tears when she heard this. After this incident, Yan Yuan strengthened her wavering heart. After he settled Ning Xiu, he rushed towards the Changkun Palace. When I arrived at Changkun Palace, I saw Xuanlong in the courtyard, soaking in the rain. The scene before him made him familiar. There was a piercing pain in his chest. He doesn't know what's happening to him. But right now, I don't care. After taking Xuanlong back to the pavilion, the two of them ate some snacks one bite at a time. Yan Yuan finally said that he did not want to say. But I had to say something. Do you have a spiritual core called inner core condensed from spiritual energy? Can I have it? His voice quivered as he said it. I'm afraid Xien Long will agree, but I'm more afraid of being rejected. This ambivalence has tortured him. Xuanlong heard this and couldn't help but ask him what he wanted the inner core for. Yan Yuan explained that his friend was ill. It takes inner core to heal. Xuanlong hasn't said anything for a long time. Seeing that he did not speak, the emperor quickly explained softly. He knew that without his inner core, Xuanlong would become no different from a mortal. But this way, we can grow old together forever. Is it very good? That sounds pretty tempting, but what does he know? If Xien Long loses his inner core, he won't last more than a year, let alone grow old together. Besides, the dragon spirit in your belly needs to be fed by your inner core. If he loses it, he could die with him. If you want to go to Xien Long, return to Dao, and don't leave your inner core. Yan Yuan felt annoyed when she heard his answer. He doesn't want to hurt Xien Long, but without the inner core, Ning Xiu will die, just like him. I don't want to give it now, but I don't want to grow old with myself. So the more I think about it, the angrier I get. I turn around and leave. Xien Long took out the wooden figure he had made before. Give it to him to calm him down, but it obviously didn't work. If it were anyone else, he would have been dragged out and killed. But this person is Xien Long. Yan Yuan can't. But I'm really angry. Therefore, in a fit of anger, he said nothing and let Xien Long go. I don't want to see him anymore. Xien Long doesn't understand why he's suddenly so angry. Yan Yuan's voice is exhausted. She hates you. I don't like you, okay? Xien Long nodded, his heart full of mixed feelings. These words pierced his heart like a steel cone. A moment later, he had the answer in his mind. So he turned around and walked towards the door, without hesitation. A few steps later, he disappeared from the hall. Yan Yuan immediately regretted seeing him leave. Send men everywhere to search. Crazy, screaming into the sky. Come back, I forbid you to leave. The search failed, and he came to Changkun Palace with a fluke mentality. Who knew that when I turned around, I saw it? Xien Long floated in the hall. Xien Long was supposed to leave. But when I heard Yan Yuan shouting desperately, I softened my heart again. He couldn't bear to leave Yan Yuan. The emperor took him in his arms. He thought Hunryong really left. And now to see him standing right in front of her, I'm sad and happy. As if a lost treasure had been found, he spoke hoarsely to Xien Long, explaining that what he said was angry. Don't make Xien Long angry. If you don't feel relieved, just stick and say hello. But how could Xien Long hurt him? He wasn't really angry, he was just sad. When Yan Yuan saw that his anger had subsided, she wrapped him up. He said he'd make up for it with Lao Xien Long. Xien Long had no choice but to obey. The two of them are sweet when things are done. Suddenly, an urgent message came from the border outside the door. Said there was a fox in the army. Hundreds of soldiers died in the streets. Even the invited alchemists have gone and never returned. Pregnant mystic dragon versus beautiful fox demon. Who knew that Xuan Longjing accidentally fell into his arms? The emperor received an urgent report from the border that a fox demon was causing trouble then. Hundreds of wounded soldiers, even the sorcerers sent out, never returned. Yan Yuan was furious when she heard this. Xuan Long knows that demons don't hurt people easily. So he asked if the army had done anything to piss him off. Chen Yan shook his head and said he did not know. Yan Yuan looked at Xuan Long and immediately had an idea. He wants Xien Long to kill the demon for him. Xuan Long pursed his lips and remained silent. Recently, my spiritual power has weakened. I'm afraid this will affect the dragon spirit. But after thinking for a moment, I agreed. Yan Yuan saw that he promised to relax, a smile on his face to show his gratitude. The emperor asked Xuan Long if he had any reward he wanted. Xuan Long shook his head. He just wants to be with Yan Yuan, and nothing else. After a long time, I suddenly remembered something. Asked Yan Yuan hesitantly if dragons can reproduce with humans. Yan Yuan looked puzzled as to what he thought. If you have children with a beautiful dragon girl, it should also be very beautiful. Xuan Long was excited when he heard this. Is that what you think? After receiving Yan Yuan's affirmative reply, he was even more delighted. I thought Yan Yuan was so beautiful. The child must be pretty good looking. If I can return safely from this trip. He told the truth about his dragon spirit. Early the next morning, Yan Yuan bid farewell to Xuan Long. When Hunryong gets to the border, it took me 3 days to find a way. Find out where the fox is hiding. The fox demon teleported to his side in the blink of an eye. He blew a breath in Xuan Long's ear playfully. Ask Xien Long why he's following him. Xuan Long quickly broke free from the shackles and distanced himself from it. A black sword appeared in his hand, and then he struck the man with lightning speed. Who knew that the man's reaction was rapid and disappeared instantly? Xuan Long thought bad, but before he could react, and then suddenly someone yanks my arm. Xuan Long fell into the man's arms without warning. The man took the opportunity to lift his chin. Are you also interested in me because of your beauty? Xuan Long quickly used teleportation to break free from the shackles. You are the fox demon, the man said coldly. The ice blue eyes looked him up and down calmly. So what? You're a demon too. Xien Long calmly asked him why he killed. The man raised his chin slightly. He asked Xien Long to mind his own business. Xien Long thinks he's about the same age as Yan Yuan. Patiently persuade him to stop in time. Do not fall into the devil, who knows that the fox demon is not grateful. To be frank, he has never been afraid of anyone in his life, and threatened those mortals who saw beauty and could not move. He kills everyone he sees. We're desperate. We'll take care of Xien Long too. As soon as he finished speaking, he slowly approached Xuan Long. Xien Long held his sword to his chest. He promised himself to be rid of evil. If Li stops, he'll let it go. I'm too lazy to argue with him. Waving the whip in his hand, He attacked Xien Long directly. The two fought for dozens of rounds and were evenly matched. If Xien Long is at his peak, we can take it down in minutes. But right now, the dragon spirit in his belly has exhausted most of his spiritual power. Even if we try our best, we can only draw. Xien Long wanted to finish the battle quickly, but suddenly, there was a huge pain in his abdomen. He subconsciously covered his lower abdomen with his hand. The next second, the whip hit him right in the chest. The dragon was struck several feet away. The barbs cut deep into the body and instantly bled. Le frowned. As far as he knows, dragons have protective scales. I wonder why this dragon is so unbeaten. A moment later, he walked to Xien Long and asked if there was anything wrong, and explained that he did not want to hurt Xien Long. He had no choice. Xien Long knew he couldn't take him down. So he went to the temple and took out a pill to take. Sit against the wall and close your eyes slowly. Tell Le to leave quickly and don't hurt anyone else. The mysterious dragon, who has been practicing for 10,000 years, actually fainted after fighting the handsome fox demon. The fox demon immediately picked him up by the waist. Xien Long came to the border to eliminate demons for the emperor, but because the dragon spirit in his belly overdraws his spiritual power, he cannot take it down. He was also injured and vomited blood by a fox demon whip. No, he had to sit down against the wall slowly to ease the pain. I thought the fox demon would have taken the opportunity to escape. Who knew that he would see him squatting slowly in front of him? Curious, he asked Xien Long who he was after. Xien Long naturally won't give up the emperor. See him silent. Mello leaned forward and lifted the dragon's chin. To be frank, a dragon as deep as he is would have to volunteer. Otherwise, they won't be easily driven. I guess you're in love with the Terran, huh? Xien Long's pupils dilated instantly. Li sees the situation and is more certain in his heart. He couldn't help but mock Xien Long for being so pitiful. Xien Long was in so much pain, he didn't want to talk to him. Coldly tell him to leave without further harm. But when he talks about humans, his expression suddenly changes. It's like he hates humans. Resentful to Xien Long about the reason for his injury. It turns out Le Ben had a brother. They lost their mother when they were young. One day he suggested that he come to the world to practice, and his brother readily agreed. But what he didn't expect, brother fell in love with a human prince. The prince coaxed his brother to say that he liked him. But I really want to peel off his fur to please his sweetheart. When Les saw his brother again, he was only alive. Leave a message, don't avenge yourself, and die. But he can't just let it go. He raised his hand and settled the prince and his sweetheart. It's like I can't control myself anymore. Screaming at Xien Long, ask his brother what he did wrong to deserve this. Xien Long didn't expect the reason to be like this. Speechless for a moment, Collar's voice choked up. In the eyes of the humans, they're all freaks. Terrans can be trusted for self-interest. When the time is right, skin them and cramp them. Get what you want. Then he looked at Xien Long deeply. What will happen to you in the future? Xien Long was suddenly frozen by his sharp eyes. After a long time, I looked down. Not everyone is what he says. But Li's next question undoubtedly gave Xien Long a head start. Then, why don't you have your heart protecting dragon scales? Has nothing to do with that human. This sentence deeply pierced Xien Long. The heart twitched for no reason, but he didn't dare to think any further. He quickly looked away to hide his inner panic. Denying the Tao has no meaning, but joy seems to have seen through it. Hate iron, but not steel, said Xien Long, self-deception hopeless. Then he turned around. He'll regret it sooner or later. Humans can't fall in love with a demon and leave. But after 2 steps, the berries stopped. Seeing no reaction behind him, he turned his head in confusion. Who knows when Xien Long fainted? He crouched down to check. When I opened my shirt, I found a large amount of blood oozing from Xien Long's chest. Joy panicked instantly. He didn't use his full strength in that whip. How could it hurt so badly? See? Xien Long is still not awake posture. He just picked her up by the waist. Without saying anything, he flew out of the temple. The fox demon finds himself hopelessly in love with Xien Long. Xien Long and Hu Yao fight to vomit blood and lose consciousness. The fox demon picked him up by the waist. He ran out of the temple without saying anything. Flash, teleport, fly, walk. Soon after, he brought Xien Long back, the cabin where he and his brother used to live. Then he called the old radish spirit who lived nearby. But the old man's diagnosis stunned him. What are you talking about? He's got a dragon spirit. Li could not believe his ears. He grabbed the old man by the collar. He raised his hand and was about to chop at him. The old man quickly held his head and begged for mercy. He said that what he said was true. This dragon does have a dragon spirit. The coma was caused by excessive blood loss and fetal chi. Le doubt. Then he asked the old man how to cure him fiercely. The old man handed him a package. There's some herbs inside for Lei to boil and feed to Xien Long. Then he turned and left. After a while, I found the crock. According to the instructions of radish essence, boil the spirit grass. Then he walked over to Xien Long's side. Feed him a mouthful with a spoon. But after a few spoonfuls, most of it came out. Li is worried to death. He used to be taken care of by his brother. I've never served anyone like this before. He thought about it and decided, and drink the jar into your mouth. The next second, he bent over and broke it open with his tongue. Although Li used beauty to deal with many scumbags, but I've never had such intimate contact with anyone before. He looked at Xien Long's handsome eyebrows and his heart beat faster. Her cheeks flushed unconsciously. The next second, he reached out to touch Xien Long's hair neck. Xien Long is asleep, breathing heavily. The pain all over his body made him shiver. I looked at his thin figure. My heart twitched for no reason. He said that the dragon was too troublesome. But in fact, he lay quietly beside Xien Long, and then she carefully seemed a little excessive. Let Xien Long not misunderstand proudly. He just didn't want people to think he was bullying patients. Xien Long took the bowl and smiled lightly. And then tell Mello he's going home. Don't hurt anyone else. He didn't want to see music fall into evil. Li Yi panicked when he heard that he was going back to the human race. A gift. Stand up and turn over the stool, anxious to say that the Terran is asking you to work for him. All the love you say is a lie. If one day Xien Long loses his value, he'll just throw him away. If you don't believe Xien Long, you can try it when you go back. Xien Long unconsciously tightened his throat. In fact, he has also noticed. I'm just kidding myself, not to think about it. Ko was pleased that he didn't answer and turned around angrily. Hyunryu will regret it. Humans can't love a demon. Actually, when I say these things, Le noticed his strange emotions. He realized that his feelings for Xien Long were different from his brother's. He doesn't want Xien Long to leave him. To have him all to yourself. To have him all to yourself. And finally admit he's facing his heart. He's hopelessly in love with Xien Long. Xien Long didn't notice his mood change. Eyes down, muttering, "Won't you fall in love?" But he wanted to gamble, and after a moment he sighed. "Leave a word you take care," then jumped straight into the air, running towards Chang'an.